So things haven't turned out as you hoped. Life took a turn. A bump. A darkened sky. And at times it may have seemed there was no hope. But here's the good news. Our God is the God of fresh starts. Our God is the God of new beginnings. Our God brings new mercies, new compassions, not just once a year, not just when things are bad, but every single morning. This season has been tough. And for many of us, things will never be the same. But we are here, breathing, maybe smiling, or crying, or shouting, or laughing. But we are here, feeling, maybe fighting, or cheering, or seeking, or grieving, but we are here, living. And we are not alone. Our God is here. Our God is with us. And our God is the God of new creations.
is greater, our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer, awesome in power, our God.
Today we pick back up with Nehemiah and building a new you as we look with eyes that are open. How many of you opened your eyes this morning before the alarm, huh? How many of you opened your eyes and wondered, was there just a whisper of white on the ground? See, they didn't talk about it this much this time, and so what we really thought what happened was there would be a white blanket, because, you know, that's usually what happens when they talk about it. It never comes. You know, it's like a no-hitter. You can't be discussing these things. But the Lord has given us a wonderful winter. He has stirred in our hearts some cool weather. Some of you who are looking for spring, don't worry. It'll be hot before long. And for those of you who are enjoying the cool weather, break out your sweater and wear it as much as you can, because it's short here in South Carolina. Today we look with eyes that are open, looking at the book of Nehemiah, looking at his life here in chapter 5. It's often easier to admit that we know what's happening than it is to say that we don't know what's happening. And often we look at things in our lives and we ignore them. How many of you have ever tried to ignore something and then it had to scream at you to get your attention? Yeah, it's sometimes easier to admit that we miss what's right in front of us. Men, we can miss our women getting a new hairdo, can't we? And then we say something to them, right? I made a comment to someone who I had seen maybe one time, I think on Christmas Eve when it was dark, and I said, "You got a new haircut?" And they began to tell me that they had had that now for about 2 or 3 weeks. Well, that's what happens, isn't it? We find ourselves missing what's oftentimes right in front of us. Well, Nehemiah, in his life, reveals to us what the advantage is of paying attention. You see, God has called all of us. He has given us an opportunity to participate with him, to do good things. As Paul writes to the people of Ephesus, that he has planned for us. Jeremiah says he knows that there is a plan in place, and the plan is good, and he has a mission for you. He has a mission for us. He has a mission for me. And as we look at building a new life, building a new you, it's not that we're getting rid of everything. Now, in a couple months' time, some of you are going to get the itch to move furniture and to clean out cupboards and to empty drawers out. Not the junk drawer, because that one, you know, we can't get rid of our junk. Some of you are going to get to your attics and you're going to go and move 3 boxes and realize this is too large of a task for undertaking. I'll wait till I move. And some of you are never planning on moving, so I guess your children or your grandchildren or your great-grandchildren or someone that you don't know or even like is going to be left to clean out that attic, and they're going to think good thoughts for you in that moment. You see, God calls us, each of us, individually to himself. He calls us that we would have a personal relationship inside of Jesus Christ. And that relationship opens a grand journey through life and faith for us. And Nehemiah has accepted that. Remember, his brother comes back and he goes, Israel is in disrepair. It breaks his heart. He spends months fasting and praying, and then he gets summoned before the king to give him some wine, and he goes, "What's going on? You're sad. Tell me your story." He says, "Go and do." This is not another episode of Flip or Flop. You can't watch this off your DVR. This is a matter of life or death, and Nehemiah must have been a good leader that God is going to call him. So let's look at a definition of what good leadership is. The art of getting people to do what they ought to do. This is the role of a leader, to get people to do what they ought to be doing because they leader. A good leader doesn't say, we have to do this, let's trudge through life. No, a good leader starts to talk about things. He gets you excited, she gets you excited. You begin to think, yeah. And then you get 7 days into 21 days of prayer and fasting, you go, Pastor Lie does. Yeah, this is not easy. I never said it would be easy. I said it would change your life. And it will, if you will submit to the process. And so Warren was telling us, we as leaders want to get people to do what they ought to be doing all along. And so undoubtedly, Nehemiah was a godly leader. He challenged people to a noble and difficult task. And he stood as he came before the people and said, listen, I'm going to lead you. I'm going to show you what to do. I'm going to participate with you. I'm not going to give you marching orders, hide myself in the office, and count the money that I'm making. That's not what good leadership does. And so when discouragement comes to the people that Nehemiah is leading, he is going to stand up and he is going to lead them through this adversity. Take your spouse by the hand and say, you know, we haven't prayed in a while. Maybe he's calling you on the job site. There's somebody who is talking about their problem, and you're like, you know what? You've always got problems. I can't tell you that. I'm having a mental thought here, and I'm not, but the Lord is saying to you, I want you to help people. I'm sending you people. You go, God, I want to be an instrument. I want to be a tool in your hand. I want, Father God, to be an encouragement. Pastor's always talking about being a Barnabas. I want to be a Barnabas. And the Lord brings somebody by your desk, and you look at him and go, I don't want to be a Barnabas to them. I want to be a Barnabas to one of those people, right? And the Lord says, no. We serve the ones that come across our path. Maybe he's calling you to lead at school. Anytime we set out to do God's work, there will always be opposition. If there's a venture that doesn't have some form of opposition, it probably isn't the Lord asking you to do it. Why? Because Satan always arises to oppose what is godly. That's why back in Deuteronomy, Moses says, I'm giving you two choices. Choose the Lord. Choose life. Choose the mission that God has for you. Nehemiah has piqued the interest, and he has angered his neighbor. The neighborhood is upset with Nehemiah. Who is his neighbor? Well, Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem. They create an alliance. They come against Israel. Why is that important? Well, Israel is surrounded on all sides. Their neighborhood is upset with them. And we're not talking about bushes that have been planted. They're talking about shutting down the building of the wall. Whether ridicule to impede, as we read in Nehemiah 4. You see, Nehemiah has gone to Jerusalem for gentrification, and they look at him and they go, this is all ridiculous. You do not want to do this. Will they revive the stones of the heaps of rubbish and burned ones at that? They're taking the charred things of life and they're trying to make it new. They're going to say, Nehemiah, you are living in open rebellion. And they are going to vehemently give threats of treason, and they're going to forget that Nehemiah was standing in the presence of the king who said, Nehemiah, go and do. Go and rebuild. And yet they're threatening him. And when we find ourselves being threatened, when we find the weight of them, our eyes may not be open to what's going on around us because we're worried. And so I want to encourage us today to open our eyes. Perhaps your eyes were not open to the traps or the trippings or the snare of the fowler, as it's recorded in Hebrew 12, 1 and 2. But old Slewfoot, our adversary, our enemy, the devil, he has the same tricks, and he comes back with a repackaged. Ezra 4, 6, and 7 says, at the beginning of the reign of Xerxes, they lodged an accusation. They wrote a letter. A letter written to Artaxerxes. The king should know that the people who came from you have gone to Jerusalem and are rebuilding that rebellious and wicked city. No, that's not a rebellious city. It's not a wicked city. What did Nehemiah do? He looked at the king and he said, listen, I need all this timber. I need letters for safe passage. I need all of this stuff. And I need all of these people to come with me to rebuild. And so there is a trick that the enemy wants to play. But the trick is the same trick he's always tricked you with. He just recycles it. He just repackages it. He stamps it new and improved and offers you a guarantee. And you know what? He does so with amazing success. Do you know why? Because humans are prone to believe the lies of Satan. Do I have any humans here today? Yeah, we must be in some pretty good company. How many of you know that we can't ignore a problem in life? Well, if you have a tooth pain and you ignore it, what happens? It gets worse. And what happens? The doctor has to get more negative with you. If you have a sore in your body and you ignore it, what happens? It gets worse, and the doctor has to get negative with it. And so what happens is Nehemiah says, if I let this go, it will fester and become something. And so Nehemiah's response to the enemies is classic. He does not ignore the three men who are just going to get louder and louder and louder if he doesn't do something to take away their voice. And so with eyes wide open today, we want to acknowledge, we want to pray and plan, and we want to be. Let's look at the life of Nehemiah. When we look at him, what stands out on his grand adventure is that he is purely and solely out for the glory of God. He is not out for himself. He's looking for nothing. He wants to go and do this thing. He looks at the people. He says, I'm here to do a job. I've got one job. There's one thing the Lord has asked me to do. I'm not looking around to the superfluous. I'm not getting in your personal business. I'm here to do one thing, and when I'm done with my one thing, I'm heading back home. When April and I were missionaries, we would ride around to all the different islands that we went to throughout the Caribbean, and I would look at them and I would say, listen, I'm not here to pastor your church. I'm not here to run the local classes for the Bible Fellowship. What I am here to do is to teach you how to do this. We're not looking to pass out fish. We're looking to make fishermen. And if you want to learn, then you're going to come to the process, and as soon as I can train one of you to do what it is that I'm doing, then I'm going to let you do it. And they didn't believe me. I was always trying to work myself out of a job. Even when we came to Mount Gallant, I'm still trying to work myself out of jobs. And if you want to know what some of those jobs are, we have places in the video booth. We've got places on the soundboard. We've got places with kids in the back. I want to get a banging youth ministry going. And maybe the Lord will birth something in your heart that says, I want to take over one of these responsibilities. This is what Nehemiah says. I've come here to do one thing. And he simply wanted to remove the reproach from God's people. You see, centuries earlier, the sons of Korah wrote in Psalm 48, great is the Lord and greatly to be praised in the city of our God. In his holy mountain, beautiful in elevation, the joy of the whole earth, the city of the great King. Jerusalem is the dwelling place of God. It had been restored once. But it needed to be restored again because it had been sacked and destroyed. And this testimony that Nehemiah wants to rebuild is for the greatness of God. This was the calling. This was the mission of Nehemiah that he both felt and experienced in his life and will answer in the living of that life. So let's begin by acknowledging a social need. Now, what was the social need here in Jerusalem? Well, there was an outcry in Nehemiah 5:1. It says, now there arose a great outcry of the people and their wives. So the men were speaking out about it, but the women were. Why is that important? Well, this was a day and age when there wasn't what we would know as gender equality. Women didn't go out and talk about and go out and make public statements. But yet here in Nehemiah chapter 5, it's so bad that the women are speaking out. And so they're speaking out against whom? Their Jewish brothers. So back to chapter 3 to set up this outcry. We find a testament that is to Nehemiah and his ability to organize. When he comes to town, he is going to get everyone involved, from the greatest to the least. He even gets the high priest involved. Now, how many of you know if he can get the pastor at the church working on this, then he's really accomplished something, right? That's a slow burn. Some of you will get that joke later. But Elisha will get involved. The only people who don't get involved is Tekoa, and they were too lazy to help. Sadly, the people that live there, his grandson is going to later marry Sanballat, creating an unholy union or alliance that God forbade. You can read that later in Nehemiah in chapter 13. It reveals that not all who start a project will necessarily finish well. We're 1 week into our 3 weeks of 21 days of prayer and fasting, and I want to encourage you, finish well. Don't give up. Don't give in the middle. persevere to the end. Listen to what our Lord says about those who persevere. You will be hated by everyone because of me. Oh, I love those words, Lord. Thank you for those. But the one who stands firm. What did our song say this morning? Just stand still. You praise God, you worship God, and you watch him fight the battle for you. Not by might, not by power, but by the Lord. He is the one who works. Nehemiah 4 is a picture of what vocal intimidation and criticism can do to God's people, and if they listen to this talk. And so Sanballat is an official in some capacity to Artaxerxes. He's talked about writing letters. He's threatening them. He's talking about doing all this stuff. His criticisms are typically more threat than actual deed. This is someone who is banging out loud and clamoring. He's a squeaky wheel needing some grease. He wants his way. And still, even though those people can't really do anything to us, Nehemiah has the support of the king. It still grinds on us, doesn't it? When somebody's out there banging the drum against us, it can hurt us. Listen to what Tobiah says to us in Nehemiah 4:3. Yes, what they are building, if a fox goes up on it, he will break down their stone wall. Now, Tobiah obviously is not a very eloquent man when he speaks, because that doesn't render very eloquently. He's saying that wall looks so shoddy. It looks so shabby. It looks like if a good wind came through, it would all fall down. Do you understand how much time you are wasting is what he's looking. And I want you to know, when he says that, what he is saying is you are building something that has no value. Saints, hear me. Your life's work is valuable to God. You look around and you go, but I'm not doing things like they are. Don't compare yourselves to them. You're not to be those, you're to be you. God created a plan. He created a purpose. He sets you right where you are, and you minister where he is. You minister care to the ones he brings across your path, because it's not haphazard. It's not unstable. It's not meaningless. Words, they can sometimes get us down. Instead of being silent, Nehemiah valiantly reminds that we accepted God's call to meet the social needs around us. Hear, O God, this is Nehemiah's prayer in response, for we are despised. We're rejected. Nobody likes us. They don't appreciate what we're doing. Lord, we're trying to work for you. Turn back their taunt on their own heads and give them up to be plundered in a land where they are captives. Nehemiah says, Lord, I reject what they say to me, but I'm not going to lower myself to get into the mud with them. Instead, Lord, I'm going to place them in your hands, and I want you to deal with them. I'm going to give my time, my talent, my energy to the mission that you have for me. Well, how do you respond when derision of life comes weighing in when you're on God's mission? Is it by praying for God's help like Nehemiah? His example places the hurt. His example places his enemies. His example places the obstacles of life squarely in the hands of the Lord. This proves so wise and advantageous, as Nehemiah will share 5 ways that he's going to respond to them in this moment. He does this by saying, first, he posts guards. That those guards are going to sit in the most valuable places on the wall. You can find that in chapter 4 and verse 9. Second, families were put together to work as units. People will fight to the death for the ones they love, for the ones that are in their family, and for their homes. That's verses 13 and 14. The third is the people will work at one time and they will guard at another time. And so forth, he established an alarm system. That means that he is going to trumpet trouble, and they're going to answer the call. Fifth, he's going to muster workers from the surrounding towns to the city at night. He says, listen, don't stay outside the gates. Come into the city and stand guard. We are better and stronger together. We may work a little slower by doing it this way, but we'll have the confidence of community. You want to know why people get outside of the community of faith and they stop going to church, they stop going to Bible fellowship, they stop finding themselves interacting with people, and they find themselves struggling? Because there's not the strength of community. You look at someone, you go, but you don't understand, I'm down, I'm depressed, I'm hurting. Have you told anyone? No, they should know. We should know what's going on inside your home. If you're not in community, how will we know these things? Well, you don't understand. The Lord surely has told somebody to call me or to check on me or to text me. We have to own our lives, people. And that's one of the benefits of coming to community. You see, when we find ourselves in peril and struggle, when we find ourselves deep in tension, stress mounting, frustration can build us up to a crescendo. And I remember once as a child, I was in the kitchen and my mom would always cook with a pressure cooker. It was this brown enamel steel pot. Now remember, in the old days, they didn't make flashy colors for kitchens. You know, brown and green, that was pretty standard. Brown was nicer than green. So the top of the pressure cooker had a little bitty whistle. I used to go in there and look at it, and I'd watch it vacillate from side to side and always wonder what happens when the pressure cooker top comes off. Was it possible? Because, you know, it would sit down, but because of the way the pressure hits it, it always was at an angle, so it couldn't come off. Well, one day I decided to take it off. Well, that's not a smart thing to do. If you're wondering if you take the top off a pressure cooker, two things can happen. One, it can erupt like a bomb and it go off like a grenade. That's not what happened, fortunately, or I probably wouldn't be standing here today. The second thing happened. It painted the ceiling and all over the cabinets and the floor because all of its contents went in there. And I was going to set that thing back on, but I was scolded because that immediate stopping of the release of pressure may have caused it to erupt. And I can still hear the puffing, and the puffing not of the whistle, but of my parents fuming in the kitchen that day as they looked at me. They were so angry. They would hug me, and then they would push me back and scold me, and then they would hug me again, and over the cycle. Don't look at me like that. I grew up in a time when kids could get punished, and you could tell them they did wrong. That's not the day and age in which we live in. Parents, children still do wrong, and they need our correction, but I won't harp that because that's not our message. But the hug and scold went on. And I could still see my dad re-stippling the ceiling that never quite matched like it once did, as he had removed the covered cooking concoction that had filled the room from my mistake. Nehemiah was in such a place. There was about to be an eruption that needed to be assuaged of this tension. The people were filled with internal discord. Nehemiah 5:2 says, "We are many, so let us get grain that we may eat and keep alive." We're about to die. I'm starving is what they're saying. We are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our homes. I've taken everything I can to the bank. They won't give me no money because of the famine. I got to pay the king's tax. I can't get around that. And so what we did is we had to sell our sons and daughters, and they're treating them like slaves. To this point, Nehemiah had been able to rally the people against a common foe. But at this point, their foe was actually wolves living among them. And so you can't get past your taxes. What do we do when we're facing bankruptcy? Many turn to Jewish loan sharks. Now, Mosaic law allowed the Jews to loan money or lend money to one another, but the interest could not be charged to their fellow brothers. Israelites become poor and are unable to support themselves among you. Help them. Help them does not mean add 30% to their bill. That's not what helping does. And so what happens is they were adding 12%. This is typical of Jews. They would look at a bill and they would charge 1 month's interest. And they would do that 12 times, which would work out to be 12% over the span of a year. But the interest could not be charged. They were not allowed to sell their brothers and sisters, their family members, their relatives of great distance, as slaves. Do not rule over them ruthlessly, but fear your God. And so what we find is that we have to reimagine what it would be like to buy a house. And many of you have bought and sold many houses. But could you imagine going to the bank and them looking at you and them saying, "Listen, you're an amazing person. You and I, we're of the same denomination. We go to the same church, and I'm going to charge you 0% interest over your 15, 20, or 30-year note. How many of you would just dance a little bit? You might get out there and just do a little bit in the hallway, wouldn't you? Because by the time you pay for your house, if you're not paying early, what are you going to do? You're going to pay for that thing 3 or 4 times, aren't you, depending on your interest rate. I don't care how good a rate you got. You can't beat 3%, which is what I got on my interest. But that's still more money than I'd rather give away. How about you? Wouldn't you rather keep it? And God said, listen, I don't want you to do that. Moreover, every 50 years, I'm going to give you an opportunity to forgive all debts and have all land restored to its original owners. This was the year of Jubilee. All the servants at that time would be set free. Now understand what God was doing in the year of Jubilee. It happened every 50 years. And so what the Lord said is every 50 years, I'm going to let every Israelite understand what salvation is. I'm going to let them encounter Jesus Christ. Well, Pastor, in the Old Testament, Messiah hadn't come. I know. But God said, listen, when Messiah comes, he's going to forgive all your debts. He's going to restore all your life. And he's going to give you everything that I had intended for you to live and minister. They called it Jubilee. What do you call your salvation? If it's not Jubilee, it ought to be. Because it ought to set your feet dancing. It ought to lift your hands and surrender. And it ought to cause your life to raise a voice of praise by him removing all of our debts and restoring life in abundance. But there's a problem. There's always a problem. Our humanity has something called greed. It's one of the sins that the Israelites will get sent into Babylonian captivity. Jeremiah said this way of greed. He says, woe to him who builds his palace by unrighteousness, his upper rooms by injustice, making his own people work for nothing, not paying them for their labor. It's greed. You see, God has a heart for poor people, and he expects us to live the same way. Proverbs 14:31 says, whoever oppresses the poor shows contempt for their maker, but whoever is kind to the needy honors God. Pastor, why do we collect food at the back? Different items each week. We do it because we want to give to the needy. Pastor, why do we go and work at Plentiful Harvest Kitchen? We do it because we want to serve the needy. We want to do what our Father has asked us to do. And Nehemiah must not have been aware of the internal stress and problems that were brewing. Remember, Nehemiah came to do one job. I want to build the wall. He's not looking at the people. He's not looking at the repair any beyond the moment of brick and mortar. He is looking to restore the gates of Jerusalem. His plan was not to deal with sin and reformation, but those problems would be dealt with by a priest. And yet they're staring at Nehemiah in the face, and when his eyes open to the problem, he just cast it off because that's what we do, right? No, not Nehemiah. His reaction is immediate. Instead of exploding in a fit of righteous indignation to ponder the situation, Nehemiah says, I took counsel, malach, with myself, and I brought charges against the nobles. Now, what does malach mean? That word in Hebrew simply means to put one's heart and one's head together as they seek God's direction. Now, how many of you have ever tried to seek God with your head? Were you very successful? How many of you have ever tried to seek God with your heart and forget your head? Were you very successful? If we want to go in step, what do we have to do? We have to marry our heart and our head. And Nehemiah says, I took counsel with myself. I sat down and had a long conversation with myself and said, self, we got to get something done. Lord, what do I do? I'm here to build a wall, and all these other things have come up. What is it that we can do to get back to the task in front of us? This was not too far removed from what David does in 1 Samuel 30:6, where he has to encourage himself in the Lord. He has to seek the Lord, his God, for the strength that he has need of. Understand that when we are looking at the lives of Nehemiah, he is saying to the Lord, I need a strategy. To simply get angry is not going to fix anything. It's not going to accomplish the task in front of us. Enter Proverbs 16:32. Better to be patient than powerful. If Nehemiah steps in, he says, I am the Lord over you. That's not going to fix them being hungry, is it? It's not going to fix the interest problem, is it? It's not going to fix the need. No, better to have self-control than to conquer a city. What does Nehemiah do? He goes to God, he pours it all out, and he comes out with a plan. What is the plan? Well, the plan requires prayer for us to implement that plan. And so we want to pray and plan. Nehemiah called an assembly to confront the people that had caused the problem. Their sin was of such great magnitude that it required a public rebuke. Sometimes we have to sit down with ourselves and say, Lord, what am I going to do? I'm facing something. I've got a challenge in my life. I don't know what to do with my spouse. We're having to talk about long-term care. We're having to talk about physical challenges. We're having to talk about children that seem unruly at times. We're having to talk about our lives, our jobs, our homes, our needs. Lord, what do I do? Where do I go from here? And so Nehemiah, in his situation, is given an opportunity to share with the people how they need to change. And he does this through 6 appeals. The first appeal is a plea for love. Nehemiah is not going to say, I'm appealing for love. He's going to look at the scriptures. Genesis 13:8 says, so Abram said to Lot, let's not have any quarreling between you and me, between your herd and mine, for we are close relatives. Let's get along. How can we get along? Nehemiah says you need to learn to get along with your brothers and your sisters. Second, he said, I got the law of Moses on my side, which firmly backed him up. But he was dealing with a shift in culture. How many of you have ever dealt with a shift in culture? Every one of us has to raise our hands. Why? Because there's a shift in culture inside of our world and inside of the church. Now that sounds a lot like where we're living today. We are increasingly becoming online Christians, where we go and we get what we need from the Word, our study, our life. We get it from somewhere. The problem is when we do that, we're typically alone, which makes us what? Isolated. When the lion, seeking one to devour, does he go to the middle of the herd? No, where does he go? He goes to stragglers. He goes to the weak. He goes to the sick. He goes to those who are not in community. And so when we think about our world, what happens is we get in a room by ourselves and we talk ourselves into this. It's not so bad. I mean, you know. And then you have to share what you've talked about with yourself with other people, and they look at you and they're like mortified. You haven't been to a doctor yet? Seriously, do you understand that the growth on your neck is like 3 inches? You need to go see Dr. Pimple Popper right now because that needs to be extracted. Oh, no, it doesn't look that bad. You know, I'm like Wilson. I drew a little hand on it, you know, and it's my friend now. No, it's not there. You need to get this looked at. And so many have navigated sin like this. Oh, it's not so bad. They wave at community from a distance. Oh, I see what people are doing online, but you know, I like their post. I share their post. We're interacting together, but you still feel lonely. Do you understand that? We live in the loneliest generation and we have more connectivity. You see, God is not fraught by the changes in technology or the advances that humanity is making. It's not caught him by surprise. You see, before exile, the Jews were an agrarian society. They lived out there off the land. But they went into exile and they come out, some of them 160 years later, and they've learned how to become business people. They have a commercial mindset and they're trying to earn money and trade and to build something for their family. There's nothing wrong with that except that God demands fair treatment. Moreover, God demands holy living. You see, the loans that they were offering, these sharks were gouging the poor, and the sharks were going against Levitical law. Because the Israelites are my servants whom I brought out of Egypt, they must not be sold as slaves. Moses says the law is facing you. The third thing he says is redemptive history. God had earlier redeemed the Israelites from Egypt, and later he redeemed them from Babylon. For example, Nehemiah and his friends are also redeeming his brethren from foreign masters. It was unthinkable that a Jew would enslave another Jew. No, they're your own countrymen. They are of kin to you. Nehemiah charges the guilty culprits who could say nothing in their defense. And so Nehemiah says, let us abandon the exacting of interest. Is there someone in your life that you're still holding a note for? They did something and you still bring it up. You're exacting interest. over a relative, over someone who's close to you. Fourth, people are watching. Saints, did you know that the world is watching us? Isaiah 42:6 says, I, the Lord, have called you in righteousness. I will take hold of your hand. I will keep you and will make you to be a covenant for the people and a light for the Gentiles. You are a light for those not yet believers. Moreover, we are a vehicle in bringing salvation. Isaiah 49:6 says, it is too small a thing that for you to be my servant, to restore the tribes of Jacob and bring back those of Israel I have kept. I will also make you a light. In other words, when you go out into our sin-cursed and fallen world, you are a light for Jesus Christ. And God is saying to you, I'm putting you on mission. You're taking light into darkness. And when that light brings a need up, I need you to pray about it in that moment. Don't say, I'll pray about it when I get home. Take the time and say, hey, that's a need. Can we pray right now? Are you comfortable with that? You don't even have to say anything. I'll pray. You just join with me. We're going to stand on Matthew 18:19 where it says, two are gathered in his name. And that he will be there working in the midst. You see, the question can be raised for us today in a similar fashion. How can the church be a light to a sinful world when parishioners are leading sinful lives? Every one of us have things in our lives that we need to let go of, that we could draw closer to Jesus Christ. That's one of the things that we do during 21 days of prayer and fasting, is that we would draw closer to God, to let go of the hold that this world has. His fifth plea is to be a personal example. In Nehemiah 5:8, we, as far as we are able, have brought back our Jewish brothers who have been sold to the nations, but you even sell your brothers. He's confronting them. How can you do this? Nehemiah says you're charging interest. You are requiring collateral. You are stealing the days and the lives of your own countrymen. Now Nehemiah, he is not bragging, because when he gives to people a note, he charges no interest, but he shows himself to be a model. He's doing what Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 11:1. Follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. Leaders, we have to lead with our eyes wide open before the world, that we would take in all that life is facing us. Join together in following my example. Brothers and sisters, just as you have us as a model, keep your eyes, there it is, on those who live as we do. Eyes open. When we follow God's plan, we can expect some amazing results. If you have been called, if you have been chosen, if you have been given a mission by God, then we ought to respond. What do we do when somebody challenges us? How do you respond? Do you handle that well? Oh, you're right. Yeah. That's a shortcoming of mine. I'm just not any good. Or do you respond by going, whoa? Do you act like my dad did? My mom would come and challenge him and say something to him, and my dad would go, well, I guess we know that mom has said something to my father. His anger. How dare you? Shame. Our shoulders slump as we slink off. Remorse. Does it grip you? Do you cry yourself out of this moment? Oh, such a bad. No, you're not. We're some shady characters, aren't we? Nehemiah 5:12 says this. We will restore these and require nothing from them. You got me, Nehemiah. You got me dead to rights. I don't know what to say. We'll do what you say, Nehemiah. And I'll call the priest and swear to do as they had promised. Now, Nehemiah was smart, wasn't he? Nehemiah looked at him. He says, hey, you guys are in agreement with me. Let me draw the pastor up. Pastor, come stand here. Did you hear what these guys just promised? How many of you want to do that? Hey, Pastor, my wife just promised to do this thing for me. I just want you to witness. Will you go ahead and put your notary stamp on that for me, Pastor? That's what Nehemiah does. But you got to understand, Nehemiah understood that these jokers had some nooks and crannies, some cracks and crevasses of their lives. He understood what was lurking the great longing, the malevolence, and how it hides within all of us. So he responds in verse 13. He says, I also shook out the folds of my garment. So may God shake every man from his house and from the labor who does not keep his promise. Shaken and empty. Nehemiah is not leaving anything to chance. No, Nehemiah says, I want to show you what a great leader does. A great leader is not thinking about the moment. A great leader is building the future. Are you hanging out in your moment, or are you building the future with God? You see, Nehemiah's sixth plea, he reminded the people of God's judgment against sin. And so what we find here, just like today, there are people who will tell you one thing and do something else. They'll say one thing, I swear, I'm taking an oath, I'm giving you my word, and then you find out that their integrity is not worth a wet paper sack. You see, integrity is based on the parties that are involved. And Jesus reminds us in Matthew 5:37, all you need to say simply is yes or no. You want to know what the newest life lesson in the Savage household is? That's it. You've heard me talk. Obedience is better than sacrifice. Grace is not getting what you deserve. This is what we're learning right now. I don't need to hear all the kerfuffle of your event. I'm going to walk them through my 5 questions, and in the end, I'm going to say, did you or did you not? I don't need the excuse, because your excuse is not going to weigh in on anything. And when they come to me, and I said, what happened? And Luke looks at me and he says, I did it. I got to tell you, I swell with pride. Because I didn't ever think he'd admit to doing something wrong. Why do you think God feels when he walks into a situation and we are dead to rights and we just go, God, I messed up. I'm putting myself in your hands. You got me, God. I'm right here in this moment. You see, with eyes wide open, we look and acknowledge at what God is asking. This is his work to do and not just ours. And we pray and we plan. This is the Lord who is revealing people and situations to us and our participation. And then we be God's example. Nehemiah 5:16 says, I also persevered in the work on this wall. This is Nehemiah talking. He looked at the people and he said, I'm doing what you're doing. I'm working just like you. Pastor, you're telling me you have a devotional life. Yes. Well, Pastor, you study every week for messages. No. I have a devotional life that has nothing to do with me preparing messages. It may give me a future thought that becomes a message or a series later, but that's not where it is. We all have to have a devotional life. Well, Pastor, you pray in front of the church. No. I pray at home. I was given a wonderful gift this Christmas. It was a wooden altar bench. And I have spent time at that altar bench praying. And every day I look at that altar bench to see if there's any wear on it. There's still no wear on it. I mean, it's been days I've been using this thing. But one day I'm going to look down and there's going to be wear marks where I have knelt before the Lord, where I have labored before the Lord, and I'm going to see with my own eyes. Nobody else is going to witness. You're not going to see it. You're not going to look for it when you come to my home. Nehemiah says, you don't understand. I'm working on the wall with you. And we require no land. My people, we're taking care of ourselves. I'm not looking for your money. He says, as my servants, we gathered from there the work. What began as Nehemiah as a building project around the wall will turn into a 12-year administration. Nehemiah will come in and he will teach the people how to live, and he will lead them in a godly way. Nehemiah will leave after those 12 years, and when Nehemiah comes back again, you know what he finds? The people in disrepair and in need of good, godly leadership. As leaders, we ought to pray for those who are above us. You know, we are in the midst of a real problem in our country. I don't know if you knew this. We have a governmental shutdown. Perhaps we should share with them Nehemiah 5. Good leaders are not to be extracting money from people working on deals when there are people that have real needs that need to be met. You see, Nehemiah refused to expense himself through an account that was allotted to him by law. He put no tax burden on the people to take care of his needs, and he and his descendants and assistants paid for their own way. Wow, that would be amazing, wouldn't it? That's some really wonderful leadership. I wish our country could take notice of that. I wish we as believers in Jesus would take notice of that and begin to pray this way. You need to understand that when Nehemiah was building, he was building a wall that was 2.5 miles long. It was almost 40 feet high. It was just over about 8 feet thick. It had 34 watchtowers. It had 7 main gates and 2 minor gates. And under his coaching, even though they had to waste time or spend time guarding themselves in shifts, it only took them 52 days. Imagine what it would be, church, if we would work together on the cause of Jesus Christ. Our takeaway, saints, what are you building? I want you to be moved by Nehemiah's heart. Listen to his prayer again in verse 19. Remember for my good, O God, that I've done good. No, he says, remember all that I have done for this people. Nehemiah says, this life wasn't about me. It was about you. Are you serving the people around you? Are you leading people to Jesus? Are you revealing new life? Are you engaged with God on the mission that he has before you? As you stand with me, I want you to know that 21 days at its heart is about you and I responding to God. Commit yourself to the process. Commit yourself to the word. Commit yourself to prayer. Commit yourself to moments of solitude where the Lord could speak into the echoing silence of your life. Commit yourself to the mission of God.